Welcome to MMA Fancast. My name's Luke Payson, and as always, I'm joined by a special guest. I say all our guests are special on this show. I think this individual is maybe more special. Welcome, Coach Kelly McCann, to the show.
Hey, thank you, Luke. Thanks for having me on.
So great having you on the show. You're on the show primarily because you're the co-owner, head trainer at Renegade Combat Sports in Frederick, Virginia, and I got to know you through Hunter Starner, who was an amateur champion for 2-for-7 fighting championships, and you're a legendary trainer, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. But I do want to also start off just from the top with acknowledging the fact that your background and experience before you got into the coaching MMA and Muay Thai is military. So thank you very much for your service. The last time you were in the military, you were commissioned as a major. You've had time in the Marines and a bunch of other coalition forces. And you've spent a lot of time, because I read through your bio, doing anti-terrorism type things, which we're all very grateful for your service and the skills that you've taught to all types of armed forces around the world for the betterment of freedom and democracy. So thank you very much for that to begin with.
My pleasure.
It is spectacular to know a human being like you and the people like you that are out there helping train military to keep people safe. Prior to getting into opening up Renegade Combat Sports in 2012, prior to that, what in your background, which is very experienced, what in your background led you to want to open the gym up? Let's start there. So sometime before 2012, you started in 80 in the military and went through all bunches of different things, including Iraq War I and a bunch of different stuff, but 20-ish, 25 years of experience prior to 2012. What led you to want to push into the MMA / Muay Thai training world?
Well, I mean, I had always been a boxer. I started boxing when I was a kid, and so that's forms the basis of everything that I do and believe in. And, that kind of like contact, what I learned as a kid is that's the most sincere expression there is, right? I mean, there's nobody that can walk into a gym running their mouth or pretending to be something because within 30 seconds, everyone's going to know, right? I mean, the minute you go through the ring ropes, we're all going to know whether you actually are what you say or you're not. And then from a competitive aspect, the same thing is true. There's nowhere to hide. I mean, there's only two combatants in our cage of the ring. Mm-hmm. Everyone's focused on that. I mean, that's really a sincere, genuine thing in a world full of bullshit. I mean, like you can't talk your way out of it. You can't pretend. Everyone's going to know. And that really was seductive to me, So when we started doing the Muay Thai training, I had been a boxer, and then years and years ago, I had operated with some of the dev group guys from SEAL Team 6 and all that, and they were heavily into Muay Thai. That was my first exposure. That was in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. And I kind of went down that journey and learned about, the 8-limb approach, and I really liked it. So I stayed doing that for quite a while. And then when we started the gym up, it made sense that, okay, well, let's compete, let's compete. So we competed in smokers, local smokers. We competed in regional events, and we had a lot of willing participants because a lot of the people we trained at Crucible, wanted to fight. They wanted to test their mettle. They were all combat veterans and things like that. And then Michelle came along, and of course, she wanted to fight. She wanted to train. So after so many years of doing that, prior to 2012, it made sense that we did something on a little bit larger scale, that it was focused on that, so that's how it kind of the genesis of it. That's how it started.
Yeah. And you mentioned Michelle Washington, now your business partner at Renegade Combat Sports. And also thank you for me to Michelle for setting this up. She contacted me because I met you guys a couple of times, and she thought you would be an incredible addition to MMA Fancast for an interview. And of course, I completely agree. I'm honored to have all guests, but particularly you with your high-level military training background. I don't get to talk to people with your background as much on this show as I'd like to. My professional job is I'm a counselor through the VA for combat veterans, American combat veterans. So I do talk to combat veterans every day. My life, I'm very sincerely grateful for all veterans, and particularly combat veterans. That's a sort of a secondary level in the military to actually be in combat. And so I just don't get to bring the two worlds together on my show as often as I'd like. So it's an absolute pleasure and honor having you on.
Thanks, Luke.
If you can, from a coaching perspective, I would think, but I'd like you to kind of answer, as a coach now, where everyone's there on their own free will, and there's a desire, as you said, to kind of prove their mettle. And we're going to be talking about Hunter Starner at some point, one of your real shining up and coming fighters. But one of the things that I think of is working with so many combat veterans. I know in the military, training is different than coaching because the trainers are higher rank and they're in charge. How do you balance your 30 years of experience of being in a situation where people kind of had to listen to you? And I think that's a beautiful situation in the military where you were the expert. And of course, you were also running with very high operators. And then maybe in a civilian world where I've been a coach where sometimes people just walk out of your gym, and there's no kind of command respect of your rank or your experience. It's a little different in the civilian world. Do you see pros and cons of both military training versus civilian coaching? I just thought we'd bring that up to get us started.
No, that's an insightful question, right? So there's different levels in the military. And when I was an infantry commander, you're in that situation where you plan your training and there's no real discussion about it. I mean, you need to meet metrics in order to be prepared for battle or prepared for whatever mission you're going to do. But then I spent the majority of my career in special operations. And in special operations, you're dealing more with peers. Rank is not nearly as important. Everyone has to perform. So what I learned from, over 20 years of doing that is you have to not convince people verbally or argue them into what to do. You have to compel them by performance. So in other words, someone comes to the table to get training, and they believe that they have a level of qualification or a level of capability. You can't talk them into wanting to do better. You have to show them that they could do better. And so it becomes much more collaborative. And I find that that's what the gym's all about. I'm 64 now. I still get in the ring with the guys. I'm on the bags. When we're cutting weight, I'm cutting weight with them. If I didn't do that, it'd be a whole lot easier for people to just walk away and say, well, I'm sick of you telling me what to do. I'm right there and I'm much older, and the same thing is true with all of our coaches, Michelle included. We share the pain. And I think that does two things. It compels their performance, and it also shows them just how much we care. That's why we don't have a big gym, Luke. I couldn't stand the idea of coming into the gym and not recognizing on sight someone I saw in the gym. It would really irk me if I walked in and said, who's that guy? That's kind of a Gold's Gym approach. That's not the kind of gym we have. It's a tight group of people. We're all in it together. Some people fight. Some people choose to train like they're going to fight, but not fight. And that's okay with us. So it's, I think that the way that, I learned was that you can't just bark at people. That's one dimensional, and you're going to lose a lot of people that way. But if you compel their performance, you've got them for life.
Yeah. For those of our listeners that have ever studied like sports psychology or any type of even leadership psychology, that's the real definition of at least what I've heard it described as like a servant leader, where you're heavy on service, you're heavy on your connection and relationship with those who you're leading, but you're treating them as if you're there, because you are, to serve them. And that makes a great connection. Not every leader has that skill set or is humble enough to be willing to do that, particularly with your background. I would imagine there are times where you know better. Yeah, you know better. I think all coaches hopefully know better in certain situations than their fighters. Or who they're training. That's part of the relationship. But to your point, to compel somebody through your relationship with them to want to listen, that makes a big difference than have to listen. And for the military people out there, there are times where it's a have to, not a want to, but the want to makes a much deeper much deeper, profound change. So that's pretty beautiful. We've also talked, Hunter and I have had him on, I don't know, 5 or 6 times now. He's great to have on the show, Hunter Starner, who was, I think, the #1 ranked Tapology amateur 135-pound MMA fighter in the Northeast and Southeast region. So pretty much half the country before he went pro. And of course, a couple of weeks ago, he went pro and was victorious in his MMA debut. And talk a little bit more about the benefit. I certainly see it. I believe it makes a big difference. I know Hunter believes it as well. But from a coaching perspective, particularly with your military background, the military is as big as hundreds of thousands of people, all the way down to special operations of 3 to 4 people in a team. So what would you think is the reason why the small groups of, let's say, 15 to 20 people in a gym work better than some of the mega gyms where they have levels and you're not even allowed to work with the Winklejohn, Coach Winklejohn, until you've been in the gym? And that's no knock against Jackson Wink.
Right.
It's just the way, it's more of a university. They have it more structured where they have dorms and they have people that are there for this training, but not with this coach and all that. So just talk a little bit more about, because you certainly could have pushed with your experience level. And if you promoted yourself a little bit more with the military background you have, I'm sure you could kind of push into the mega gym world. But with all your background in special operations, what do you think makes I said around 20 people, but even sometimes smaller than that, what do you think makes a small group so much more powerful for the training and combat performance?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of competing ideas there, right? So like in a mega gym, you've got guys that are climbing rungs of the ladder and they aspire to get with the named coach, so that can make them work harder. But also in a bigger gym, there's a lot more places to hide. There's a lot more places to sandbag. There's a lot more places to shirk responsibility or accountability from the fighter's perspective, if a guy gets lazy or whatever. In a small gym, the spotlight's on you all the time. There is nowhere to hide. Everyone's going to know if you did the work or you didn't do the work, and how you did the work and what the quality of work was. The downfall to a small gym, Luke, is the number of people that are available to spar. So like with Hunter, what we do is we send him to Colton Smith's gym, enlisted 9. Colton's a great friend of mine, really good guy. I've known him since he was fighting back in the M1. Pat Militer's a good friend of mine. Matt Larson, who brought Colton along, is an old military buddy of mine. He's the father of the Army's combatives, so we knew each other from that realm. So there's all this collection of people, so we can tap Hunter into different places where he gets the breadth of people that he should fight. Like when we sent him to Thailand, same thing. I mean, he was exposed to some very high level, Thai guys. We're just not going to have that guy walk in the gym, But it's also interesting to note that, like a lot of coaches, a lot of named coaches, they attribute sometimes a lot of the success to them, which they should. However, you still got to have the right guy walk through the door.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, you can be a really, really good coach, but if you don't have the material to work with, it's just not going to happen. So like even in our smaller gym, there's a caste system. There's a tiered system where some guys are going to light the world on fire. Like Hunter's work ethic is just ridiculous. I mean, the kid eats, breathes, and lives fighting. This is his career. He's all in, and so he brings a lot more to the table, and as well as skill, obviously, than guys who they have 2 kids, they're working, they have to be worried about that. It's going to be a different approach. So I think that the benefit to a small gym is you understand all the people in your gym, all 20 people. We had a kid just recently, Luke, that really had promise as a heavyweight. Okay. And he had some issues, and all the stuff that he was struggling with. And after we trained him for, I don't know, 8 to 10 months, I wanted to fight him. And Michelle said to me, she said, we shouldn't do that. He's not there yet. And I said, what do you mean? I mean, did you see him last night? The kid was great. I mean, his wrestling's improved. His Muay Thai's better. He's cracking on the bags. And she said, he mentally is not there yet. And he'll go right up to weigh-ins, but he won't show. Guess what? A week later, 2 weeks later, after she said that, he pissed off somewhere. He just went away.
Yeah.
You know, he just went away, disappeared. Now I find out he's in a different state. She knew, you know, so it's this collaborative effort of us. She brings stuff to the table I don't have. I bring stuff to the table she doesn't have. And it's like a fight family, you know, like Hunter has explained it, like Michelle and I are his fight mom and dad,
Yes.
you know, and that's totally kind of true with all of our guys, you know. So I don't know. I mean, we wouldn't have it any other way. You know, we could blow the gym out. We don't have any kids in the gym. We don't allow anyone under 18 because that's a whole nother thing. And that's just not who we are, you know. So it's a fighter's gym. The way we support the gym is from what we do in the real world, which you've read my resume, you know what we're involved in. So that's what allows us to have the gym. The gym, you know, breaks even. You know, we're not interested in making that the point of making money, you know. And by the way, we're also not interested really in sharing purses with our fighters, which is another thing that big gyms, they're specifically interested in that. I find that kind of parasitic. I know it's business, but it's just not who we are.
Well, yeah, I mean, and to any fighter out there, particularly if you're not within, you know, driving commuting distance to Kelly's gym, if you are, definitely contact them, check it out. But I think for the fighters out there, you have to find a situation that works for you. For some fighters, that they end up like contractually having to share big purses with the gym. We've seen that even at the UFC level, you know, and maybe that works for them, you know, because they feel like they show up and all the coaches do everything for them and whatever it is. But I certainly respect what you're saying. I think my limited time running an MMA gym just outside of Philadelphia was through a church. So it was technically a nonprofit, and all I did is I bought everything and then everybody came for free because it was an extension of the church outreach. And I liked it because I did have some people start trying to talk to me about how to make it profitable. And I was like, I don't need it to be profitable, because for me, it was an extension of my ministry and my desire to develop. And I've always been either a pastor or a coach or a counselor. So I like the developing of humans, even outside of a sport or MMA. But there are certainly people that are more business minded. And if that works for them, I personally am really respectful of you for having a very high stress business job in the real world, where there's real stakes and all that stuff, and then using the financial abilities you have from there to run your gym that also has a lot of high stakes in it, but is more, if I can say it, more your passion project.
Yes.
And is that how you feel to coaching, that it's your passion project?
Absolutely. How many stories, Luke, do you know of where a coach will start a gym because it's passion, and then it becomes a business? And then that coach, his performance slips because he hates it. He has to go. You know what I mean? And both Michelle and I prefer to have it be a true passion. You know, I mean, I think you get more fire that way. You said something when you were just speaking to me. You were being profitable. You were being emotionally profitable and spiritually profitable. You know what I mean? So like you were profiting, right? Because you're producing these kids and you get everything that you need out of that. We make our money a different way, you know? And so like, that's kind of, we're on the same plane right there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I wouldn't have known that without having you on the show. So I'm really grateful for you coming on, because sometimes it takes talking to meet a like-minded coach or a like-minded person just in general. And sometimes you end up having a conversation and realize, oh, we're not like-minded, because I've met coaches when I used to coach collegiately in track and field, a completely different sport. But I met some coaches that I'm like, wow, I would hate my kids or any kids really, to be coached by them, because it was a very selfish, motivated coach. That might have been a good technical coach, but I want to look at the heart, and sometimes the heart's not where I would want it to be. But then again, I had parents at the college level not send their kids to be trained by me because they thought I was too soft. But what they meant by that was encouraging and motivating and caring about the whole athlete, rather than strictly screaming and yelling and insulting 18-year-old freshmen because they're not performing like I want to. So there's always a balance to everything. And we could do a very long, almost TED talk on the different mindsets. But I remember probably the worst, and I'll it won't really matter if somebody figures out who he is because he got fired eventually anyhow. But one of the worst coaches I've ever seen was a college coach, the college I used to work at. I remember one of my friends who was on the track team, but who's also their best wide receiver. It's a Division III school, but the best wide receiver they ever had. And he had made a drop in the game the week before or something. And I stopped by practice to check in on him. And the coach was like out of control, telling the whole team, 120 kids, that this person dropped the ball on purpose to embarrass the head coach. And it was an ego trip of ego trips. And what I realized is that it doesn't matter how technically good a coach is. If a coach makes everything about them, I think that's an unhealthy relationship, and I would encourage anybody, if you have a struggle, whether it's in a gym or outside personally, and your coach makes it about themselves and isn't at least compassionate or encouraging, particularly on a down day, then I think that's probably an unhealthy place to be emotionally. And unfortunately, that happens a lot in the more combat type sports. That's obviously right. MMA, that happens a lot. Football, it happens a ton. And a lot of people just assume, well, this is the bad relationship I have to be in as an athlete to a coach. And it's an honor having you on to say out there that you can find a coach that respects you as a person, a man or a woman, and that wants to really, refine you into a better athlete, absolutely, but also respects you as a person. So
coaches should always remember that walkout song isn't for them, right? It's for the fighter. Yeah. You got to remember that.
Well, yeah, and one of the things that's so great is that technical skill doesn't mean much if you can't mold it to be applicable to the individual. So one of my techniques in coaching at the college track level was coaching triple jump. And I had a lovely Crystal Baker, who ended up being an All-American at the Division III level, was wonderful. But I remember talking to her and a bunch of other athletes that if I try to only coach one way to one athlete, and then they go, coach, that doesn't make sense to me. And I go, well, you're the problem. Really, I'm the problem, right? And so what I realized is I need to be able to explain the same technique about 6 different ways until a person individually. So for you've done a lot with Muay Thai and hand-to-hand type defense stuff, but I bet to you, no matter how many times you've taught a jab, how many times I've taught a jab, I still find unique ways to tweak it depending on the person that I'm teaching it to, because they have to be able to receive it. So it doesn't matter how technically good the information is. Everybody learns differently. Everybody makes muscle memory differently. So just in your experience in the last 10 years of doing Renegade, and obviously way before that military, how do you kind of coach yourself as far as how you're going to coach, if that makes sense? Because sometimes I've had to tell myself, okay, Luke, you have to go to plan B, C, D to explain the same thing because they're not getting it the way I would want to teach it. So how do you kind of roll through the way to teach, because teaching is by itself kind of its own sport, so to speak?
Totally. So if you look up learning types, right, you'll learn, and as a counselor in your background, you know this, right? So there's kinetic learners, there's oral learners, there's visual learners, there's people, who need to feel it. There's people who need to see it. There's people who need to actually do it. If you look at the difference between, I'll give you 2 examples, Hunter and Sean Murphy, who's one of our up and comers. When you speak to Sean, it's like the teacher in the old Peanuts cartoon strips. He's going, wow, 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 wow. It's making no sense. And more words isn't going to help Sean understand it. Now, Hunter, you can say the words and he locks onto it and then he'll execute. He'll do exactly what you say. But with Sean, you have to do it to him. You have to actually use the strike or put the strike in a particular way and actually let him see it, and then have him do it, and then he owns it. So what we try to do when we teach is I'll try to fire on a kinetic level. I'll try to fire on an oral level. I'll try, oral being, hearing. I'll try to fire on a visual level by demonstrating. I'll try to hit as many as the learning types as I can, so that in a group of 8 people or 10 people, I know I'm at least hitting one of the ways they learn. Because, you know this, it's difficult when you have a gym where we go camp to camp to camp. I mean, we're busy, we're fighting all the time, right? And so sometimes the people that aren't fighters, they're looking for like a programmatic, like I come to class, I stand in a rank, and that's an impossible metric. You can't achieve that in a real fight gym.
Right.
So what we do is we tell those guys, look, you're going to get to what Hunter's doing anyway and prep for this fight. So that's what you're doing. We're all doing this together. And that's the way you organize it. But it's kind of an unconventional approach compared to newbie classes,
right,
where, you've got a plan, you're going to execute this plan over 6 months. You're going to go from here to here to here to here. In a fight gym, you can't do that. So it has been challenging in that respect. But back to your original question, the way that we try to sort out how to approach everyone, we're using all the methods every time we teach, in as many as possible. And then, of course, handle the individual circumstance or questions as they come up.
Yeah. And that sounds to me, that sounds like the dream coaching mindset, to recognize that everybody learns uniquely. The one, which I'm sure you do, the one thing that you listed through is also to have a person that's just learned a skill, once they've gotten it down enough, to then instantly teach it to somebody else, even if that person already knows it. That's something I would group two people up and say, okay, we just learned an escape, but through all the ways that you just said, you watch it, you drill it, you talk about it, you feel it. Sometimes I'd have to push somebody's hips, because you could tell somebody, hey, this is what shrimping is. And you can demonstrate a shrimp where you kind of scoot your hips, which is called shrimping. And some people get it by looking at it or hearing it, like you said, Hunter does. But some people, like you said, your athlete, Sean, I would have to kind of grab the hips, push the hips, and they could be like, oh,
move it.
Yeah, then, oh, that's what it is. But one of the cool parts is seeing how quickly people integrate it into their skill set. When, to your point, when you were talking about Hunter, and of course, he's under 2 weeks away from his second pro fight. He's going to have 2 pro fights in like a month time frame. And you guys are driving. So God bless you there. You guys are driving all the way down to Florida. So have fun with that. But I think what's really cool, and I would throw that out there, if an athlete, if you really like, sort of like you go to college and you're in the beginner classes for a couple of years and you move up, that's great for them. I like what you're saying, where skills are taught as needed. So somebody's going to jump in and work maybe a little higher level with Hunter, but then that becomes their base. And I realize this too, that instead of starting sometimes with basics, and of course there are basics to learn, sometimes if I taught 3 or 4 submissions and defenses, then the athletes pick up what makes sense most to them, as opposed to, oh, you don't learn. I had athletes come to the gym and they're like, well, we didn't learn anything past rear naked chokes for the first 6 months. And I was like, what if you get in a situation where they do something other than that, Right. So I think the exposure method that you're talking about, of course, your military background, it's real world application all the time. And it's okay if somebody's out of their depths. I know you as a coach, and as a coach, I would tell people, like, I expect this to feel like you're drowning. And Hunter will know that if he's working with somebody new, but that's okay, because the learning method is going to go up much faster when you're in a drowning situation. And I don't mean the SEALs drown proofing, although I'm sure you've been around that.
Oh yeah.
And that's a real thing. If anybody wants to be kind of horrified or maybe motivated, watch, there's a couple of YouTube documentaries out there on how the SEALs do drown proofing. And it's as tough as it sounds. But getting back to you, for you, and you just mentioned Sean and Hunter, what is exciting about coaching 2 up and comers, or 10 or 15, whatever it is, that learn completely differently? Is that preferred, so that you're kind of always strengthening yourself as a coach? Or would you love everybody, I'm going to set you up a little bit, I guess, would you love everyone to be the physical Sean type learner, or the academic sort of, because Hunter is very cerebral in his approach to things, or obviously, do you like the blend, so you have to do both?
I kind of look at, I like the blend. And the reason I do is I look at, you've done enough sports training yourself to know that you're never going to look left and right and get this. You're never going to achieve the same level of performance. Like you're never going to bring everybody up to the same level and do this and go perfect.
Yeah.
I like to look at it like it's a music equalizer. So if you
Yeah.
think about the different, you've got bass, you've got mid-range, you've got treble, you've got all these other things. And although they're in different locations, when you turn the music up, all the values increase,
Yep.
right? So it's a huge success if across the board you can say everybody got better tonight.
Mhm.
Now, everybody's not at Hunter's level, everyone's not at Sean's level, everyone's not at Rodrigo's level, but at the end of the day, every single one of you got better. And that's reality. You know, I mean, that's kind of the way you have to approach it. You never get to put your hands on your hips and say, we all arrived. You know, I mean, that's death right there, right? You can't do that. So I kind of like the challenge. I kind of like the interesting thing. And Michelle and I have ad nauseum talks about how best to approach it. Like she's got a real knack, a real kinetic eye. Like she can look at what a person is doing and pull stuff out from a different perspective. Like I might see it and I might, identify that, but she'll come at it from a different perspective. So with us working together like that, and then working with all these different personality types, that's another thing we do, Luke. Every one of our fighters, every one of our people that we train, we have them take the 16P personality type.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So we know exactly who they are. And that way you can never be disappointed, right? Because if they do something, you can't ever get mad at them because they're being a logician or they're being a logistician or they're being an INTP or ENFJ. So we have everyone take that test and we have them take the learning style test so that we know exactly how to approach them. It's a pretty cool approach.
That really is. And now I'm thinking back and thinking, man, there's always when you look back, there's always a way you could have done something better. So I wish I would have thought to do that. But to your point, I hope people are hearing you and realizing that there should be a lot of work behind the scenes for coaches where
Yes.
like you're coaching about coaching, like you and Michelle are getting together and figuring out, because I remember just in my own experience as an athlete in college that sometimes the best athletes, it can be tough for them to transition to coaching because there's so much like, well, I just do it. Well, how do you do it? I just do it. And it's like, okay, now there are some incredible athletes that are also great coaches, but there's times that great coaches have to understand that it's more important to convey it. Yes. And to your point, that the respect somebody's personality. And I always remember when we're building somebody up to fight, and I would kind of match make for them and stuff like that, we would do training, obviously, like the Shark Tank type, like where you're kind of burning them out. But I would also train, which I'm sure you guys do, the corner, and I'd practice them doing diaphragmatic breathing, but I'd also practice the fact that, and I'd ask every fighter, like, do you want me to be directly honest, which I prefer to be, but some fighters don't like, do you want me to say, hey, you definitely lost that round, we need to do this, this, this? I've had some fighters say, you know what, you got to be encouraging no matter how bad or obvious it was. So then I'd be like, oh, okay, hey, you know, and I realized that by giving them a voice to say, how do you want me to handle you in the corner? Because we've seen even at the highest level, sometimes it's apparent that fighters are like sort of disregarding their coaches in that 45 seconds you have. And so that's something I learned to literally drill and practice the concept of that, almost like a pit stop for the car. We'd have to practice, and I would be sometimes maybe a little bit too much, but with the person who's maybe applying the ice, I'd be like, hey, you got to be comfortable getting in there, because sometimes they just kind of hold the bag floating like a cloud. I'm like, no, you got to be able to put back of the neck, chest, or wherever they're asking for it. And we would drill this, and I had very willing participants to kind of practice, because every once in a while you'll see fighters that get in maybe early in their career and they get confused by that short time, and they're coming out of the corner looking like they don't have their mouthpiece or they're not sure what's going on. So
so to that point, Luke, so you know, we run corner clinics, right? So to be a professional corner, I couldn't agree with you more. You've been to enough fights.
I've done it.
Like, I mean, to see hands that I wouldn't put them on as mittens. They don't even know how to wrap hands properly. You know, trays with nothing but like a chapstick in it. It's like, what are you doing? I mean, like, no adrenaline, can't close a cut, don't even know what that is. that's stunning to me, because that kid busted his ass. We run obviously 60-day camps, right? So he worked really hard. And if it's because of you that he lost, oh my God. The other thing is you see all these coaches in the corner and they're screaming and they're animated and they're fighting. The way we do it is, as soon as the bell goes, we'll have them turn around. They take 3 super, super, super deep breaths and exhale. So when their ass hits the stool, they're under control. Their breathing is under control. Mouthpiece comes out, ice goes on, a little bit of water. I don't even say anything to them, Luke, for like 20 seconds because they're not hearing it, And then what I'll do is I'll pick out during the round, like the 3 things that I want them to remember. And I'll say like, okay, listen, he doesn't like your leg kick. What did I just say? And I have the fighter repeat to me, he doesn't like my leg kick. All right, I want more leg kicks. And then I'll say like, have you noticed he's moving into your strong hand? He's circling the wrong way. I need you to use that advantage, use that round kick. Okay. And what did I just say? And I make them repeat it back to me. That way I know I didn't overload them. I wasn't making it about me and throwing my hands and getting hyper. If you're hyper, you can't do your job. So yeah, great points that you're bringing up. We could go on like this for a couple hours.
Yeah, and I am absolutely thrilled. I kind of did my own corner clinics, but I didn't realize that they're a real thing. I just would do them after what we had like a competition practice, and I would have people stay, and we would just drill and drill. And sometimes I would have the referee, because I know you've experienced this, and I respect referees. Sometimes they harass more than they help. Like there's times where the commissioner or the referee will sort of harass and interrupt what you're trying to do. So we practice that. But yeah, I remember the first couple times I would give a ton of information the first 10 seconds when they sit down. I was so thankful we were training it because then they didn't retain any of it. That's when the 2 tricks I would do, which you're obviously even higher than that with the repeating back. I had them do that a little bit, but my main 2 tricks were the diaphragmatic breathing, getting them, because we know the difference between the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. And if anybody wants to look that up, you'll learn a lot of information about the nervous system and how in a fight, whether it's an emotional fight, like I deal with a lot of people with PTSD and panic attacks, their brain shuts off and they just go into the fight or flight mode. Or if it's an actual fight, and if anybody's ever been in like a car accident or a really stressful situation, you won't hear things. You won't see things that are very obvious. And so one of the things that I always point out is the diaphragmatic breathing. And then I would do a little thing where I'd give them a very simple math number, but not 2 + 2, like maybe 1 + 4 or 3 + 2 or something, and have them answer it. And then I knew that their intellectual brain was back on.
They're present. Now present.
That they're in the present, right? That they're able to take in information. And since we're making this a coaching clinic, coaches that get offended when their fighters say, huh? I'm never offended, because it means it's not computing, right?
That's right.
So if a coach says something that's the most genius thing in the world and their fighter is not taking it, it doesn't matter. You might as well not say anything.
Right.
So that's one of the things that I've learned is to kind of look for the eyes and look for the engagement, like you're saying. And I'll tell a funny little corner, and we joked about it later. Fortunately, my fighter still won, but he came into the corner and he told us that his opponent's leg kicks sucked. Now, I took that to mean that they were hurting him. And what he meant, which is why it goes a long way to have communication, what he meant is that they weren't hurting him, like they sucked as in they weren't good.
Right.
And so that was one of those things where at the time I took it as they were bad. So I gave him some counters and some things he could do, because of course I want to be receptive. His name's Jordan, great guy. But then afterwards, he said to me, like, Luke, why were you coaching me on how to defend and stuff? Because I told you that they sucked. And what was cool is my other coach in the corner with me said, yeah, Jordan, you told us they were hurting you, so we figured we had to help you. So it's one of those things where sometimes communication is tough. So after that, I would do, and I know it sounds strange, military guy, you have a preset alphabet, you have preset terms. And so we coached each other, and I would ask the fighters, what term do you want to use when this is happening or that is happening? So you can say it. So if you say the word, their leg kick sucked, does
Right.
that mean they're hurting you and we need to do something about it? Or does that mean they're weak? And, so I would use the word weak or
Yep.
they're, something like that. But it really, the two-way flow. And so what's something, and this is a wide open question, take it any direction you want, but what's something that you have learned from your athletes in the last 10 years? And what's something that you think you might continue to learn in the future? Because in my mind, it's just little communication things I always want to be willing to learn, because you never know how somebody's going to take a word you say. But for you, what do you think you've learned from your athletes, and of course your military time as well, that you gain not expecting maybe to learn something as the coach?
So that's another great question. Honestly, what I've learned, like sometimes I'll get frustrated, right? I was always a stand-up guy. I was a really suffocating kind of fighter. I'll get inside your t-shirt, and some of that is fear biting and some of that is, but I always found it safer inside. I always had fast hands. So I always want my fighters to get off first and get inside, you know what I mean? And what I've learned from them, and like I'll spend getting ready for a fight, like a month on ways to get inside, on ways to cover that dangerous mid-ground space so that they can either be way outside or way inside, and then I'll be calling for it in the fight. And sometimes, some of our fighters, they're just not closing that space. And I'll say to Michelle, what the hell is his problem? We drilled this for a month. And what she said to me was, and she's on point, she said, then it's our fault. It's not his fault, because even though you've shown him and you demonstrated it and he did it in sparring, we haven't got it done in a way that he's now executing. So what I've learned from my fighters is when they're not doing what you're calling for, it's not them.
Yep.
It's you. And that was because, at the special operations, when I was in a tier 1 unit for over 10 years, now that's like the Olympics of the military.
Oh yeah.
And the peak performance is, it's incredible. Like you're an Olympic athlete. So normally when you're dealing at that level, you need to see something once or twice and then it's yours. And that's dangerous shit. Now I'm not talking about, it's like truly dangerous stuff, and so it frustrated me at first, like, why can't he do this? Why won't he do this? Does he not trust me? Does he not believe me? Did he not see me do it? No, I just didn't hit it right yet. And so that's what I've learned from them is never blame the fighter.
Yep.
Blame yourself. And that's what's going to drive your performance as a coach. And if you take that seriously and it's ego free, you'll get them across the goal line. But if you blame them, they're not going anywhere.
Yep. Yeah. And I maybe I'm too hard on the football mindset, but that's the difference that I saw in my personal experience between the football coaching, where if anything, and I'm sure there's great football coaches out there, but what I saw is that if anything went wrong on the field, the football coaches would call them dumb, idiot, because in their mind, I taught them everything. And I remember he's a great guy. But my first head coach when I was a jump coach was a football coach that was also a track coach, and a lovely guy, Jason Fablo. He's now coaching down in West Virginia. But he did a good job of coming over to me and saying, hey, what can we work on in the future? Because sometimes I would tell him, I was like, well, we train this and it's falling apart in the real world. And it's okay if it falls apart in the real world, because then it means, okay, we covered it, but it didn't stick. And sometimes, to your point, when you've had a decade in tier 1 operations, which they are the Olympics, I think you know this, but for people that might not know this, the selection process can be anywhere between 10 and 20% passing, maybe sometimes less. I'm just taking a rough number. And so one of the things that you're getting, what's called a confirmation bias, which I'm sure you know that term is, you're getting biased by only having people who have already been weeded out as far as in the tier 1, they have to be able to sort of adapt in the way that the military needs them to. And that's, of course, a good thing. And hats off to all those who have gone through that, because it's really the best of the best. But I think, to your point, there's times where you want to be able to bring along people that maybe wouldn't be a 1% or a 2%. Right. Because I think some of the greatest, particularly in MMA, I think some of the greatest MMA fighters are not a 1% fighter. They're just good everywhere. They're willing to learn everywhere. We see the 1% fighters, the DC Cormiers that was an Olympic level wrestler, but we also see the 1% level guys that have a struggle widening their skill set out. And then
That's
we've seen people that have just developed, and I would say to some degree, Hunter already had an intense wrestling background, but he's developing into somebody who I think can be that fighter that's good everywhere, and that's
Yes.
their strength.
That's
Because
right.
sometimes, and I'm, of course, Ryan Hall, who was really good at the leg locks. He got into the UFC, and I wouldn't want to fight him, but he was very predictable. He would do the Mori roll where he'd roll
right.
in on the leg, and it worked really well. But at the same time, his strength became his Achilles heel, because if you could defend that, you could defend
Everything else he had.
Yeah, you could defend everything else. But then again, I give him a hats off for being the best at one thing and being so good, like Ronda Rousey's armbar, being so good that if they can't defend it, they're going to lose. So there's the mental game to everything. It's been really interesting. I want to give a shout out to a guy I used to coach through Pursuit MMA. I'll just call him Sergeant Mike. That's what we called him. But he was a combat controller for the Air Force. That for the Air Force, and had several tours in combat. And one of the things that I learned from him is he could never transition to unarmed combat after being in armed combat. And we set him up a couple different times for some kickboxing fights, because he was 13-0 as a military boxer before he got in combat. But a lot of his combat, similar to your stuff, was hand-to-hand type fighting with weapons and all that type stuff. And what I had to realize as a coach is it's okay if he can't transition back where life and death isn't happening. He just couldn't make the lovely guy. He became a great coach. He ended up re-enlisting and going back over to Afghanistan, and he's what keeps the United States safe. But in my mind, I realized that his mind had shifted, right? His mind had changed from when he was boxing 13-0 before combat. He could do the unarmed combat and be very good at it. But once he was in an environment where the loser is dead, which is obviously Tier 1 or any type of special forces, any soldier at all, they play for keeps. There is no do-over. There is no, and so I just realized from him that it was a disservice to try to take away the way his brain was now functioning, because of all the years of training in combat that made him very effective in what he needed to do. Have you ever seen that with other combat vets? I know Tim Kennedy went back and forth between very lethal stuff to the UFC to back to very lethal stuff. Have you sometimes seen people that can turn off the lethality and get into the sport, which I think is beautiful? And have you also seen people like Sarge Mike that just couldn't do that?
Yeah, I mean, last week I went into the gym and was surprised by an old unit member, buddy of mine. And he went through a dark period. Probably sat in front of a guy like you to get together. Super operator syndrome. You're familiar with that?
Oh yeah.
So he had operator syndrome, and the reason he's back in the gym now is he said, "Look, I know you trained me. I mean, I was with you. I bet." He said, "I know you'll hold me accountable." So he said, to the extent I'm able, I wanna come in here. And I want to do something where I'm looking forward to it, and I'm kind of I'm not deploying anymore. I'm not doing HVTs anymore. I'm not doing any of that, but I still want to be plugged in, and I still want to feel like if I walk outside a Wawa or a 7-Eleven and I get jumped, that I'm going to be able to throw my hands. That I'm going to be able to take care of business. So I've seen it both ways. The hard thing is, of course, as you know from your this counseling business that you're in, is that every single person, it hits different, right? It hits different, and there's not a one size fits all. You can go this far with this guy and get his head up and out of the hole and back in the game, and then the other guy, you're only gonna get him forehead high. That's all you're getting. But at least it's better than him having his head under the ground. So yeah. It's really an interesting thing. Hunter's father, is a really storied combat vet. As you saw, he lost a limb in combat. He's got 5 Purple Hearts.
Oh my
God. Yeah. He was scout sniper. He was a senior staff NCO guy. I mean, he's a legendary figure himself. And there's an interesting relationship with Paul and Hunter and his mom and me and Michelle and all the other fighters. I mean, like, it's just this eclectic mix of like everybody, but the overriding thing is we're all going in the same direction. You know, we might be taking different paths to get there and everything like that. Nobody's stepping on anyone's toes, and we all get what we're trying to accomplish. You know, so it's yeah, it's kind of wild. You know, it's that what you're talking about there. When you get someone who's been adrenalized, they're now got that operator's thing going. It's hard sometimes to make them understand that that's not everywhere.
Yeah.
You know, that's not everywhere. Now conversely, and another interesting thing is between the combatives crowd and the MMA crowd. So the combatives crowd, you know, they tend to impugn combat sports, and they go, well, in combat, there's no referee, you know, there could be multiple assailants, there could be weapons. But what a lot of those people don't understand, Luke, is because they don't do combat sports,
Right.
is that there's no friggin' safe mode in the ring or the cage.
Right.
People are trying to hit each other as hard as they physically can. And since the combatives groups have never experienced that, it's easy for them to misunderstand and say, yeah, but it's a sport. Yeah, but it's a pretty rugged sport.
Yeah, right.
And the referee is not there to prevent a knockout. He's not there to prevent someone from being choked out or submitted. They're there to protect them after that happens.
Yeah.
You know, so it's an interesting dynamic when you talk about men and how they perceive combat sports, and women, and how what they think that genetically they should just know how to do, but what reality is. It's truly fascinating, right? But it all starts, I believe, with having no ego and understanding that we are all vulnerable. Even the best fighter is vulnerable. And once you embrace that, then learning can really start to happen. But if you think you're invincible and all that, and it can't happen to you, that's the wrong road to be looking down.
Yeah, and you've just perfectly described the learner's mindset, something that I try to always encourage both in athletes, but even for combat vets. One of the best things for anybody dealing with a mental health issue is to what we call in the business, go to a strength-based approach and say, okay, how have you approached problems or situations in the past? And yes, now it's a mental health issue, now it's PTSD, but if you used to be open to learning and trying new things and recognizing that you're not an expert and that you need to develop your skills, you can do that with mental health issues. And a lot of times when I click into somebody who's obviously been highly trained and highly successful in the worst situations on earth, it makes sense. And they go, well, wait a second, I can use my ability to want to learn and try new things and be and be rugged and be willing to keep going, be persistent, you know.
That's right.
Because that's what makes a huge difference in just the overall mental health world. Another thing that, since this has become very combat focused, I always will encourage, and I'll say it to you, but I'll encourage anybody out there. I was taught this by my uncle, who's a Vietnam vet, Bronze Star recipient in Vietnam War, and I lived with him when I was a teenager. He always taught my twin and I, yes, there's another one of us out there, my twin and I, to walk up to combat vets and not only thank them for their service, which I think is very important, but also say, welcome home. So to all the combat vets, welcome home, because the homecoming process can be in many ways worse than the combat process for a lot of veterans. So I always want to tell people that will make a combat vet feel much more understood and appreciated if you say welcome home, because that homecoming process can be much harder than what they were anticipating or expecting. And so is life. You know, life is full of trauma, even if you've never been in combat. I'm always shocked, and this is a mental health thing, but I'm always shocked how many veterans come to me and their number one trauma, even though they've been through bad traumas, the number one trauma was child sexual abuse or child trauma. And one thing I will always encourage anybody that's experienced trauma when they were a child is, one, recognize that it's not your fault, you were a child, and a perpetrator who was an adult, usually in the position of authority, used that position of authority against you.
That's right.
In an evil way. But the other thing is to recognize that you're capable of healing and growth and change now. And so that's something I happen to be very fresh with that this week, and recognizing that when people seek help for mental health issues, recognizing that you need to start wherever it works for that person. And sometimes as a counselor that specializes in combat vets, sometimes that's talking combat, but sometimes it's talking 4 years old. And I
right.
think one of the things as a coach is sometimes you'll go up to an athlete and say, hey, what's going on? And you'll get a completely different response about their stepdad or their mother. Or I remember sometimes when the holidays were coming up, that was a pressure cooker for a lot of athletes. And so their mind wasn't on what we were training because they have family issues. If people don't know, the holidays can be very traumatic depending on what childhood people had. So I think it goes a long way to just recognizing that we really need to meet people where they are, and people like you that have had all the experience you have to still be kind. I think that's one thing that a lot of combat vets start to realize. It's called post-traumatic growth, but recognizing that like you've appreciated how bad humans can be to each other. So you can also appreciate how good human beings can be to each other. And that really comes from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And if anybody's never listened to it, it's on YouTube for free, or you can get it and read it. But really recognizing that it's the way we interpret what's happened to us that's within our control. Because you can't prevent trauma to a child or trauma in combat or some other type of trauma, rape, whatever it is. But where the growth is how we interpret it and how we grow through it and from it. So that's been a free mental health thing, I guess. But an absolute honor having you on. I thank Michelle so much because she said we'd really enjoy getting to know each other, and it's really been an absolute pleasure. But for you going forward, you mentioned your young age of 64. For you, what are the next sort of watermarks in your career as a coach? Like, what do you have things you want to see or accomplish by 65, by 70? Like what's sort of what you kind of still want to achieve or accomplish in the sport of coaching and running Renegade's gym?
Thanks, man. I wanna see Hunter, Sean, our fighters to the big show. That's why I always tell Hunter, it's just an audition, man. I mean, like, we caught this fight with CFFC. That's great. We've been chasing them and Ring of Combat with Frankie Perez and Lou Negla's thing up there. And we've got some good connections, stuff like that. And that's good and it's great and it's competitive, but it's still an audition. And then even when you get to the big show, you're still auditioning. And there's a difference between winning, right? Fighting to not lose and fighting to win and be exciting. And people don't want to see, someone get in the ring and maybe win, but it's not inspiring. It's not exciting. People don't pay for that. So I want to see my guys through to being those exciting fighters that people go like, wow, that kid's got a full, complete game, and he's doing that. Personal health wise, I got CTE, of course, so I deal with that, and there's a decline, like when I get tired, you'd think I was drunk, it's a form of dementia, pugilist dementia. But I mean, right now I got it under control. Things are cool and everything like that. I just want to stay active. I still want to throw my hands. I'm 64. I'll be 65 in December. I think that when I stop doing that, that's when the decline really happens. So I still want to be able to go in and get on the treadmill, get on the rower, hit the bags, get in the ring, do a couple of rounds with the guys, and stuff like that. So I think that's important. And I mean, as far as like personal goals go, I've got to figure out transitionally what the succession plan is. So like at some point, right, we all get old. And I think at my age, you have to start looking at and really accepting, not that I haven't already in my military career, that you die. So it should never shocking, right? It should never be a surprise. Like, oh my God, he died of cancer. Well, we're gonna die of something, right? And it's coming. So I've spent probably the last like 10 years really trying to orient and align myself so it's not a surprise, and I kind of look forward to it. It's like, what's the next big adventure? I mean, like, this is played out, so what's next? So I'm trying to mentally get to a place where that's as graceful as it can be, and also take care of logistics so that when I go, I don't leave a mess behind. I don't want an estate that's in tatters. I don't want people fighting. I don't want any of that shit. So I think that succession plan, like at what age do I move out of the way with Michelle and we go, okay, now Hunter, you and Matt are going to take the gym and you're going to make it yours. You don't have to do it exactly like we did it, but where does that go? You know what I mean? How does that happen? and just kind of be graceful in the glide slope to the end. I think they say the Indian culture calls this is the third quarter, right? We're in the third quarter, and we're looking to make the fourth quarter as pain-free and as pleasant as possible.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm at.
Well, I mean, that was an incredibly open and honest answer. And I think that's what helps there to be. We could do a whole thing on intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. But when you're internally motivated, when it's going to be something that you appreciate as a person, I've spent the last couple of years of my life predominantly working with combat vets from Vietnam, and they're all 75, some older than 75. And that's actually something I've done a lot with, is recognizing that it actually decreases anxiety and depression to address that death is coming. And I've had to make contact with the National Cemetery and set up, because if people don't know, veterans can be buried for free, and so can their spouses. And we set up all the estate. We have a whole packet we go through. And obviously some humans, we resist that. We resist the idea that we want to be prepared, and then maybe we just ignore it and okay, I'm not going to force anybody to do something. But it's been incredible to see how, and this can sound strange, but how much more willing an older person is to live life when they know they've got it squared away when they're gone. Their estate,
that's right,
their burial, the stuff that nobody ever wants to talk about. I'm telling you, I have seen gentlemen in their mid to late 70s that were just kind of maybe moping or just kind of like sad. And once they get that stuff cleared up and they've had the conversations, maybe they've videotaped themselves to be played once they're gone, which technology can be beautiful, and they've done those type things, then they're like, hey, I can enjoy what I have left because I'm not dreading whatever I wasn't facing. So really fantastic for you to actually go to that depth and recognize that it can actually be a beautiful thing. My dad's almost 91, and he was in the Korean War, and he is
thank you for his service.
Well, hey, I will pass that along. He's very close. Well, he's on the slope a little bit more than maybe others, but that's something that he's been great. We always joke because he's probably picked 5 different pastors to do his funeral, and they've all retired before he needed them. And we keep saying, Dad, you keep getting older. All these pastors are retiring before you can use them. And he's like, yeah, it's the problem with getting old, you know? So, but it does really make a difference. And I think future planning really does go a long way. It's been an absolute honor having you on. And hopefully people share this, not just for the contact when it comes to Renegade, because I think that's really important, but also just as the mental health side of things, the human side of things, a recognition of what combat vets go through to some degree, but also just making, and I quoted Viktor Frankl, but making life meaningful, recognizing that it's really about the purpose and value of life more than the externals. And that can go for anybody at any age. So it's been an absolute honor. I can't wait to see you in person, because now that we've done this, I feel like we'll really hit it off even more in person. So thanks so much for your service. Welcome home to you and all the combat vets of any generation. And so grateful for all their service. And a special thanks to all those military personnel, my best friend and really good buddy, Cable, who's currently in Kuwait, and I'm sure many other people who are all over the world protecting our freedom. So thank you so much.
Awesome, man. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Cheers, brother.
You got it.